So, I've just gotten out of a pretty significant relationship with someone of 4 years, nearly engaged, and moving in together, etc. When things fell apart, I took a good amount of time to be on my own and get my shit together again. When my friends began encouraging me to get back out there, needless to say, I really wasn't wanting anything at that point, nor looking for anything, but they insisted that I at least just go out on a few casual dates for practice, just to kind of get my skills back up for when I was ready. I think they were honestly just worried because I had become quite hermetic. So I matched with this girl who's home from college for the summer. She's a little out of the way from me, but was eager to meet. Seemed really interesting, was even willing to come to my area, etc. I really wasn't all that interested, to be truthful, but my friends again encouraged this, practice, whatever the fuck that means. A date doesn't mean commitment, whatever. I want to be clear, though, that I was extremely honest and explicit with her that I was not looking for anything serious or anything really at all. I was very forthcoming that I had gotten out of something serious and I was just kind of encouraged to explore. She persisted and still wanted to meet, so we agreed to a casual lunch in a sports bar that week. I get there, and she was already waiting for me. I was a bit put off by how much different she looked than her pictures. Not trying to sound shallow or anything, but her pics from Tinder easily had to be at least 5 years old, which I verified based on tattoos that she had in person versus ones she didn't in pics. So I was a bit thrown off by that. I wasn't the least bit attracted to her, but I was there to just have new experiences anyway, right? No big deal. I felt bad because the entire time she seemed so incredibly shy and awkward. I even noticed her hand shaking when she reached for her glasses, which I found endearing, honestly. So I did my best to get her talking and try to help her feel more relaxed. I asked her questions and chatted about things I figured you chat about on dates. Where she grew up, music she's into, school she goes to, major, etc. All to which I literally received one-word answers. It went on like this for about an hour, and she was just not working with me at all. But I tried to keep room in my heart because it was clear she was feeling anxious, and I understood that on a personal level. Then she pulls out this book and says, "I got this for you." And I responded very grateful, thanking her and inquiring what it was about. 'Cause hey, if someone wants to share a good read with me, I'm all for that. She looks at me funny and says in a very sudden but odd tone, "You're kidding, right?" I'm very confused and just kind of look at her like, huh? And she says, "This is your favorite book. You told me this was your favorite book." To which I said, no? I have never even heard of this before. So we concluded that she ultimately got me confused with someone else she must have been chatting with, which I honestly found hilarious. She was embarrassed, but I made light of it and said I found it funny, 'cause I get it. That's Tinder culture, I guess. So as we finished lunch, and I'm still receiving one-word answers despite our funny moment, I kind of become a bit suggestive that we should conclude our date by saying I had to get back to feeding my animals and do some laundries, etc. But she became very adamant on spending more time and asked if we could go do something else. I was genuinely trying to be a decent person, so I agreed, and we found a nearby park to walk. That's where shit gets weird. We sit on a park bench. Mind you, it's broad daylight. There's kids playing basketball nearby, folks jogging by. I start trying to make conversation yet again, but still get the one-word answers. Then, out of seemingly nowhere, Without any warning whatsoever, she proceeds to just kiss me really aggressively, tongue and everything. I was honestly just so shocked I stood there frozen, not knowing what the fuck to do. I had this timid, shy woman who's really not made conversation with me at all, who was so nervous she visibly was shaking, just turned into a frickin' bear mauling my face in like 6 seconds. My head was spinning with confusion and anxiety, and I swear it felt like it lasted forever, and I just prayed for it to stop. I was so put off and honestly a bit afraid to do or say anything. Like, what do you even do in this situation? I was just hoping that she'd pick up on my very obvious body language, that I wasn't reciprocating anything at all. I was completely unprepared for a situation like this. Then, some really nasty guy walks by gawking and catcalling, and literally begins propositioning us into a three-way. And I'm just like, what the fuck is going on? I need to get out of here. I was 1,000 different types of uncomfortable. I ended up managing to ward him off after telling him very politely no more than several times. All the while she's just laughing, and I'm thinking, who even are you? Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde over here? What the fuck? So he leaves, and I'm insisting now that I need to leave and go home. She seems to ignore whatever I'm saying and gets very close to my face again and says, "Did you like that? Do you think I'm sexy? Do you want me?" When I tell you I was so fucking nervous, I was like, I really need to get home. And she was just like, "Can I come?" And I told her very firmly, no. She literally tried to persuade me to let her come back to my place with me, and I had to say no more than once, like 3 times. So finally I'm home, and frankly, just kind of shaken up. I hadn't really done the dating thing in quite a long time, but that felt very abnormal. She then texts me after she gets home and asked me out on a second date, and I was very kind despite being made incredibly uncomfortable. And I told her that I thought that she was a very cool chick and I had a nice time. Lie. But that I did not feel anything there, and reminded her I wasn't looking for anything. She then text bombed me a bunch of crazy shit, saying how she didn't understand and was so confused, that she thought I was so into her and that things went great. I did not respond to any of these because now she's continuing to cross my boundaries. I said what I needed to say, and I thought I was being decent by at least being honest. So the text continued, and I figured they were going to stop eventually because it was a first date. How can someone be so upset over someone not reciprocating on a first date? They did not stop. By reading the text, you would have probably thought that we just ended a 2-year relationship. Then she began calling, at which point I had to block her number. So nightmare Tinder girl, please, for the love of everything, let's never, ever meet again. I was 21, recently became a police officer, and was also recently dumped, so my friend suggested Tinder. As a 21-year-old and a new cop, I had the "I'm invincible and I can take on anyone" mentality. I matched up with a very good-looking, out-of-my-league female. We chatted and eventually set up a date to meet. She said she had a great open field to look at the stars and hang out, and we could meet up at her house. So the night came. I was excited, and she seemed to be excited when I picked her up. She guided me to the field, and it looked nice. Open space, woods, deer, and other wildlife. In the field, I noticed really dim headlights in the distance. Then the van started driving towards us and pulled up in front of us, almost close enough to block me from going forward. I told her to stay in the car and I'll go say hi. I grabbed my flashlight I had in the car and walked up. In the front driver's seat of the van, there was a decently sized man. I asked him what's going on and if he could back his car up a little bit. He was very polite and said he was the owner of the property and said he didn't mean to scare us. He told me he's been having trouble with poachers on his property and just wanted to make sure we weren't going to be shooting anything. I assured him we only came here to look at some stars and wildlife. He was perfectly okay with that, told me to have a nice date, and drove away. After that, the girl was texting non-stop. Around an hour later, I saw headlights coming towards us again, this time at a really fast pace. We hopped in the car and I moved to a more defensive position. The same man came close enough to almost hit my car. She hopped out of the car at that point and ran towards the guy. I immediately knew that I was fucked. I got out and gave them commands to back up and get on the ground. Neither of them complied. Obviously, he then proceeded to charge me and knock me to the ground. Luckily, I was able to get him on his back and get up. I saw my date grab a metal pipe from the van. She told me that she had a gun and to give me my money and my truck, and I would not get hurt. Of course, with my I'm invincible mentality, I said no. She started to cry and saying they didn't want to hurt me. When they started to go back towards the car at that point, I told them I was a cop, drew my concealed firearm, and told them to lay down on the ground. After a moment of shock from one of us, they complied. I was able to call 911, tell them my name and my badge number. I had two at gunpoint and needed to back up immediately. I gave my dispatcher the best directions I could to this field while on the phone. They both fled. Again, stupid, new cop, young guy mentality. I chased them. I took off after the man. We ran into the woods around the field. I chased him for maybe 30 seconds and heard 3 loud pops and saw muzzle flash. My invincible mentality went right out the window. I ran like hell back to my car and peeled the hell out of there. I went back to the area I picked her up in, called dispatch again, and had officers come to that location. Of course, the first officers to pull up was my sergeant and my field training officer. Of course, they were both completely understanding and did not give me any shit about it at all. The most words that they used was dumbass and stupid fucking rookie. I hopped in their car and went towards the field. Luckily, the van was still there. They told me to shut my goddamn mouth and only come out if I heard gunshots. They cleared the area and started looking in the van. They found meth right there on the center console and searched the car. What scared me the most was when my field training officer and sergeant came back to the patrol car, let me out, and told me to come look in the back of the van. Both of them were pale, looked horrified. I went to the back of the van where there were several knives, duct tape, lighter fluid, a decent amount of rifle ammunition, handcuffs, and what looked like dried blood, and the front seat passenger side. We found an AR-15 style rifle and 2 more handguns. We called for immediate backup and detectives. We then investigated the blood. It turned out it wasn't blood. The plates had been stolen and the van was reported as stolen. I still get a lot of shit about the whole encounter, but luckily no one got hurt. I will never use online dating ever again. This was 3 years ago, and I started college down the country. I was 18 and on Tinder. I never actually met anyone off of it, but I would just swipe through guys just to be nosy and see who was on it. I was swiping right on some, and about an hour after, got a message off this guy, who, according to his account, was about 20 kilometers away. We made some small talk. It was awkward, and I stopped replying. A day later, I got a friend request off of him on Facebook. Mind you, I have a common enough name, so it would have took ages for him to have found me. We have no mutual friends, and my Tinder photos is not on my Facebook account. The only thing I had on it was the university I was attending, so maybe that's how he found me, but I don't know. I then quickly got a follow request on Instagram, and he somehow found my Snapchat username. I don't have it on my social media, and it is a variation of my full name with extra added in vowels and an underscore. I was freaking out at this point. I messaged him asking him how he found out my full name, and he just replied with, "I think we have a connection. I really want to get to know you better." I unmatched him, deleted my Tinder, and blocked the accounts he tried to add me on all social media. After that, it was quiet for a few months. I was staying in digs and was knuckling down as I had a lot of assignments from the get-go. This was towards the end of November. I had no assignments due for 2 weeks, so I decided to go out with some friends. One of my friends stayed in student accommodation, and the other was commuting, so she was staying with the other friend. I decided to walk back to my digs, as my landlady would probably freak out if I wasn't home that morning, and I really wish I got a taxi instead. My walk back was about 15 minutes from the local nightclub where we were at. It was about 3 a.m. at this point. I was at the front door of the house opening up. The door was annoying as it had been 2 different locks, and I had to pull the handle towards myself to open it up. It's also tough when you're tipsy and trying not to wake up the family you're staying with. Anyway, as I finally unlock the door, a dark car pulls into the housing estate I'm staying in. It's quite big and has a big green area in the middle for children or people to play with their dogs. The car comes towards me, so I quickly get inside and lock the door. The car pulls into the driveway of the house I'm staying in and just sits there with the full headlights on. I'm there shaking and too afraid to move from crouched below the door, as there's frosted glass about halfway up. As I get the courage to go upstairs to look out my bedroom window to see who it is, the car pulls out of the driveway and speeds away. A few days later, I get a new friend request off the creepy Tinder guy on my new Facebook profile, as there was no photos on this account, just the same name, blocked. It was enough that it caused me to transfer universities the following year. Thankfully, I haven't heard anything since. I don't know if it was just bad timing or if it was that creepy guy on Tinder that sat in the driveway, but it was petrifying. If you take anything from this, be careful who you let in your social media or dating apps and what information you have up. This is possibly one of the weirdest things to ever happen to me, and a throwaway seems like a good idea when telling it. I just moved to London, and being a bit lonely and wanting to get into the dating scene, I tried doing the whole OkCupid thing. It was alright, and I honestly wasn't too active on it. I check on my account a few times a week and message some profiles of girls. that I thought were pretty. 95% of the time my messages would go unanswered. I'd guessed it was mostly because many of my messages in retrospect were pretty uncreative and dry. One day, I was messing around looking through various profiles when I saw an extremely attractive girl and decided I had to message her. In my opinion, she was a perfect 10, not just the fact that she was a gorgeous blonde, but we liked a lot of the same music and movies, and well, I could actually send her a decent email because of all of the things we had in common. I also need to reiterate that most of her pictures were of her smoking, which definitely clouded my judgment. I should also mention that I'm a former military and Afghan veteran, so nothing really scares me. Almost immediately after pressing send, she responded. We messaged each other through the OkCupid messenger service for about a week, and I got to learn a lot about her. Her name was Aoife, and she was from Belfast. She told me she had a daughter named Rosen, which didn't really bother me, and had a very long, complicated story about how she grew up a Catholic in Northern Ireland during the Troubles and was an orphan at a young age. She seemed really driven and had such an amazing story. I had so many questions, and in all reality, a lot of respect for her, so it was really easy to keep talking to her. Within about another week, we started talking on the phone, and then sometimes on Skype. She'd never do an actual video chat, which at the time I didn't think was too weird, but she'd send me pictures of her and her daughter, friends, etc. For the most part, this whole thing seemed legit. The stories she had were pretty detailed, and she was talking about stuff that I really didn't know a lot about, and honestly couldn't comprehend. Then there were parts of the story that seemed to get kinda weird and didn't add up. At first, she told me she was a hairstylist at some swank place in central London. I don't really frequent central a lot, so okay, no biggie. I just met her online. I wasn't going to head into central to stalk her at work. Then she said that she owned a bar in Camden called the Lock Tavern, which I looked up on the internet and is a real place, and managed it on weekends. She had detailed stories about the bouncers and regulars, etc. This didn't seem to make a lot of sense, but okay. I mean, I guess you could do both jobs and be a full-time mom. It seemed odd, but she seemed driven, and she also seemed really hot, so who was I to judge? Again, I wasn't going to be super creeper and pop down there. I just took her word for it. She also said she lived in a really nice penthouse near Covent Garden, which, if anyone knows the London real estate market, didn't seem plausible on a hairdresser barmaid's wages. She explained this by saying that she had fallen into some money after the Troubles. It seems kind of far-fetched, but again, without actually meeting her, who am I to judge? I started to notice some other weird things. She'd send me pictures, and in some of them, certain tattoos were present, and some they weren't. I figured she was just sending old pictures, but I remember that is what started to tip me off. The things were fishy, to say the least. But again, there's really nothing wrong with sending old pictures, and I had no real reason not to believe the photos were of Aoife. They all seemed like the same girl, and without the exception of the tattoos and some small changes in hair color, nothing really seemed out of the ordinary. She would also send pictures of her daughter, Rosa, whom she claimed was 14. Finally, after talking to Aoife for a few weeks online, I asked her out on a date. I figured it was time I finally meet her. We were set to meet up on a Friday night, and on that Friday night she doesn't respond to a single text or call. I had nowhere to meet her. By around 9 p.m. she texts saying things got out of control, at her pub, and she was really sorry, but she had to cancel. I was upset and should have bailed there, but I forgave her, and we agreed to set up another first meeting. Things from here really started to get weird. As I said, I was doing the online dating thing, and in this time, I'd met a few other girls. Another girl named Jo had asked me out, who turned out to be a psychopath, but that's just because she had an uncontrollable temper, and is nothing interesting enough to put on here. I went out with Jo one night in an area of London called Shoreditch, which isn't too far from where Aoife's pub was. While I was out, Aoife called and texted me a few times. I basically just ignored the calls. When the date was over, I said bye to Jo and went home and called Aoife. She asked where I was, and basically, well, I lied. I said I was out with a friend. Aoife didn't say anything, and we talked on the phone for a bit, and then said goodnight. The situation got strange a few nights later when Aoife caught me in a lie. She claimed to know that I was out with another girl. She knew which restaurant I was at, and the night that I had been there. She knew what Jo had looked like. Aoife claimed that one of the bouncers from her pub knew what I looked like because she had shown photos of me to him, and he recognized me when I came through the doors at the restaurant in Shoreditch. This got odd. This was odd, to say the least. I basically told Aoife that the date was set up before I'd ever met her, and that we weren't really dating. She had no right to be upset, plus she'd stood me up. If anyone should be mad, it's me. To be honest, I forgot what really happened in this part of the story. I think we fought for a little bit, didn't talk for a few weeks. Then one night she called me really late. It seemed off, so I answered. She was panicking. From what I could tell, she was suffering from sleep paralysis, which I know is scary, so I stayed on the phone with her until she went back to sleep. This happened a few more times. I really had no intention to date or even see her. I went home to the US for about a month, and while I did, kept limited contact. There was nothing too serious, and my expectations were pretty low. After I'd gotten back to London, she invited me out. I don't remember much of the details, but she ended up canceling on me. I basically decided fuck it. I wasn't even upset. We had texted a little bit, but the communications really started to die down. I really didn't think much about it, and went on with my life. Then one night, I entered the Twilight Zone. One day, I was in the King's Cross, St. Pancras area with a friend of mine from the States. He had to make a meeting nearby, so I was by myself in the area. That's when I got a text from Aoife. She asked me if I wanted to meet up, and I figured, hell, might as well finally meet this girl. I was in the same area of town, 2 stops away, and I didn't see any harm in it. She told me to meet her up in Camden, and she'd be in the Weatherspoons pub at noon. It wasn't a date, and at this point, I was really curious as to who she was. I'd literally spent hours talking and texting to this girl, so I don't know Camden that well, and I'm getting texts from her on the way up. As I'm trying to find the Weatherspoons, she's telling me she's at work and in the process of selling her share in the bar, but she's on her way. Another friend of hers is at the bar, but he's a great guy. You'll like him again. I was already there, might as well meet her friend. Then I meet Reese. Reese was a tall, skinny ginger kid. He was about 21 and had a thick Irish accent. I walked up to him, shook his hand, and we got drinks. He seemed nice enough, and for as weird as the situation could potentially be, it wasn't all that uncomfortable. Another one of his friends was there as well, They seemed like two nerds in their early 20s. They talked about football and video games and all the other stuff 20-something-year-old kids talk about, mixed in with a little bit of politics and a couple of random questions about how do you know Aoife, etc. I'd been in Afghanistan fighting the Taliban a few years prior. The situation wasn't anything to be concerned about. Then, I got a text from Aoife, something along the lines of, "Hey, getting tied up. Be there in about an hour." Reese seemed nice enough, so we hung out for a few more beers and we moved to the next pub. Still no Aoife. Reese and his friend was nice. We did rounds, and fortunately, I hold my beer pretty well. Another apologetic text from Aoife rolls in. "Fuck it, we are drinking," I thought, and we're having a good time. Reese would ask me random questions about Aoife, but basically I shrugged it off. Being one of the only few things we had in common, we bar hopped around London for a bit. At one point, I was in the queue to buy a round of drinks and felt like this guy was way too close to me. I turned around and saw an overweight old man with an ugly brown jacket and a pockmarked face. He had a crucifix tattooed on his neck. In all honesty, a typical barfly you'd see in a British pub. I'd say excuse me and walk past him. We'd continue to drink and bullshit the day away. By this time, it was like 2 or 3 o'clock and Aoife is nearing 3 hours late. I decide, fuck it, let's go to the Lock Tavern. Reese and his friend seemed cool with it. We get there, and there's 2 Irish tricolors flying above the place. "Yeah, you can tell Aoife owns the place, huh?" Reese said. The part of the story kinda added up. We went into her place. I text her to tell her we're there. "Oh great, I'm almost done with this. I'll be down in a minute." She never comes down. But this is when the story gets really, really weird. This other dude named Pete shows up, shakes Reese's hand, and Reese says, "Oh, you're here to meet Eva." I look at Reese, and he's like, this must seem weird. Eva is Aoife's best friend. Now, this seemed really weird, but I needed to figure out what was going on. These 2 girls have almost exactly the same name. I had never heard Aoife mention Eva before. I start talking to Pete, and Reese starts asking similar questions to him about Aoife that he was asking me about Aoife. But some of these questions were getting more serious. He was asking him things like, "Do you love her?" Pete's story then starts to sound eerily similar to mine. Pete meets Eva online. She's from Northern Ireland, has a daughter named Rosa. In his version, she's 12. He'd tried to meet up with her and a few times, but it fell through. He was invited last minute to hang out today. "Oh shit, this is weird," is all I could think. Something wasn't right. At this point, I knew that someone was getting played, probably me, and I was in some kind of game, but I needed to figure out what exactly was going on. Pete and I started to figure out things right about the same time. Right in front of Reese, who stuck his guns on the story remarkably well. They both have similar names. They both have daughters that are around the same age, with a really common Irish name. I'm not buying it, neither is Pete. I decide that the pub we are in might not be friendly territory, and I don't want to get shanghaied in Camden. So I suggest we leave. Aoife sends me a text saying she's almost on her way down. "Great," I said. Meets up with us in the street at some other pub. Pete and I start walking out. On the way out, I ask the bartender, "Hey, is Aoife working today?" He responds, "No, mate. Aoife hasn't worked here in 3 years." At this point, I know something really, really creepy is going on. We head to the next pub. I've got a good buzz going on, but I know I need to sober the fuck up. fast. I think Pete might be a victim in this game too, but he might not be. He for sure can't be trusted. Reese and his buddy are suspect as well, but I don't have any proof yet, and my curiosity is keeping me there. We walk into another pub. Reese's friend says something to Reese, and I don't hear it. Neither does Pete. Reese loses it. He yells at his friend, and his friend basically says, "Fuck you, I'm out," and takes off. Pete and I are still trying to put things together. I find a table on an outdoor deck. It's quiet. I can think, and I can piece this together. It's amazing how fast you can sober up when you think you are in trouble. I ask Pete if he has any pictures of Eva, and Pete pulls out his phone. He shows me a picture that I'd seen before. "Wait, that's Rosa, Aoife's daughter." "No, mate, that's Aoife," Pete replies. This is making no sense. I'd been sent the same pictures of the same girl and been told it was Aoife's 14-year-old daughter. I showed Pete pictures that I had of Aoife. He claimed he'd never seen the girl in the photos before. Reese was sticking to the story that I had pictures of Aoife and Pete had pictures of Aoife, and that he wasn't sure why I thought the pic of Rosa. He also kept claiming that Aoife and Aoife texted him and they were on their way. That's when it dawned on me. I simply looked at Pete and asked him, "What number do you have in your phone for Eva?" Pete reads the number on his phone, and it turns out being the exact same number I had for Aoife in my phone. If all the other clues hadn't added up, this one sent it over the edge. It also sent Pete out of the bar as he literally jumped over a table and ran out the door in a panic. At this point, it was just me and Reese. I don't think that he had overheard that we both had the same number for someone that he was telling me were two separate girls. Reese said that Eva and Aoife had texted him and that they were on their way. I don't know who Aoife and Eva are at this point, or if they even exist. I basically tell Reese that I think he's playing some kind of fucked up game and that he's more than suspect of wrongdoing. He took offense to this and physically threatened me. He wasn't a big dude and knew if he stepped to me, it wasn't going to end well. I basically walked right through him, knocking him into the door frame, and tore out of the bar. I headed straight for the tube. I needed to jump on the Northern Line and get home. I wasn't waiting for anything. At this point, I have no idea what the fuck is going on. At best, I'd been caught up in some weird fucking catfish scam. At worst, I was almost a victim of a snuff movie. I get on the tube and there's a guy right behind me. I look at him. He's overweight, pock-marked face, brown jacket. We make eye contact. I look up at his neck and there's a crucifix tattoo. It's the same guy from earlier. I'm a bit worried, but I've been under worse pressure before in my life. I calmly sat down on the train. The train was being held in Camden for some reason and wasn't moving. That's when who jumps out of the same carriage as the two of us, Reese. I could have sworn he made eye contact and gave a nod to the man in the brown jacket. At this point, I played dumb that they were there. On the London Tube, there's a certain dinging noise that's made right before the doors close. I waited to hear that noise and then bolted out of the door. I ran around and doubled back on the tube several times. When I finally got back home, I texted a friend in New Cross and told her I was scared I was being followed. She was having a party that night and invited me over. I really didn't want to head home alone. At this point, I think I doubled back and switched lines enough that if Reese and the man in the brown coat were following me, I had lost them. I made it to New Cross safe and sound. I had a few calls from Aoife the next few days, but never wanted to answer them. She also sent a few texts saying we needed to talk. Eventually, she stopped calling and texting altogether. I have a few theories on the whole issue. One of my friends thinks that Reese and Aoife are the same person. I wouldn't rule it out, but the person I talked to on the phone definitely sounded like a woman. If you're new, go ahead and hit the like button and subscribe to my channel, as it really helps me out. And if you are already subscribed, welcome back and thank you for subscribing.